You can count on me being here for the tournament.
And you can count on me waiting for you in the parking lot.
Throughout the years, we've had so many different Dragon Ball games, ranging from my childhood favourite Budokai 1 to 3, the Tenkaichi games that people loved, and even some of the Game Boy ones that I will admit weren't bad for what they were. Now, the last Dragon Ball game I covered on my channel was Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2, a game where you created your own character in the Dragon Ball universe, and you do a bit of a Back to the Future where you go back in time in the Dragon Ball Z timeline to prevent changes being made and ruining the timeline.
Great Scott!
It was and is still my personal favourite Dragon Ball game, with the ability to create your own character, play them in your way, and all races having transformation abilities was pretty damn cool. But there was another Dragon Ball game that released after Xenoverse 2 that many, including myself, considered to be the best way to re-experience the story of Dragon Ball Z without having to watch 18 episodes of Goku charging up his Spirit Bomb against the fight with Freiza.
3 hours later.
Release it!
And of course, this is with Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. Now, released back in 2020, Dragon Ball Z Kakarot has us again revisit the story of Goku, but properly, with fun moments of the show and without fast forwarding through the main events. For example, the Saiyan story arc takes about 4 hours or so to go through, so yeah. Anyways, we play as Goku or Kakarot and re-experience the story of Dragon Ball Z, with our first introduction being a little bit of combat against Piccolo because, reminder, but at the start of the Dragon Ball Z series, Piccolo is a villain, before quickly changing and hanging out with little Gohan as we use the flying nimbus to fly around, the most underrated mode of transport in the series if you ask me. Rather than repeating what's already been done with past games, Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, which I'll just refer to as Kakarot from now on, but rather than already repeating what's been done with traditional arcade fighters or third-person fighting like, say, Xenoverse, Kakarot is an open-world RPG. Not only is there combat to do, sure, but you'll also be leveling up your characters from Goku, Piccolo, Gohan, Trunks, and my dude Vegeta, all of which having upgrades or skill trees, side missions to complete should you want to do them, or just random exploring the world. If you played the Xenoverse series, then the combat in Kakarot will be a bit familiar, but the controls are changed out a bit, and it can be a bit of a shock like me if you go from smashing a buttload of buttons in Xenoverse 2 to then move over to Kakarot. Now, I did play this on PC, but I used a controller just as a reference, as there was no way I was going to play this game with a mouse and keyboard. Now, in Xenoverse, there was a light and heavy melee attack button where you could do your combos and such, where here in Kakarot, it is a one-button melee system, so you just smash the shit out of that one button. Now, one button is also used to throw those small, quick energy ball attacks, basically like, say, throwing a tennis ball, but there's also a button to do the step, which is that wicked quick movement dash ability that's pulled straight out of the show, and the final face button on the controller has you charge your energy or activate your surge ability, which acts as a separate temporary buff. Now, where Kaioken or Super Saiyan can be activated at any time in battle, Surge charges over time and gives you increased movement speed, increased melee, and increased energy attacks. Where Super Saiyan or Kaioken, yes, buffs you, the Kaioken drains your health, while Super Saiyan drains your energy.
Pretty standard, really.
Controller triggers are used for blocking, and depending on what face button you press to, allow you to vanish and appear behind your enemy for quick attacks at the cost or use of your own energy, as well as having your special or unique attacks and your transformations like Kaioken, the Kamehameha, or instruct allies to use their abilities. The final buttons on your controller will be the D-pad buttons, which allow you to use items just like you could in, say, Xenoverse, where you can use a Sensu Bean or whatnot to heal yourself. The combat generally plays a bit like it's pulled out of Xenoverse, and that is the third-person pseudo third-camera style arc, where you can easily track enemies and where you are. When enemies use ranged or certain attacks, we get this highlighted field of trajectory of where it's going to hit us, giving you enough time to, say, block or dodge out of the way. The combat does, however, slightly change up when going up against characters when they're doing their signature attacks. For example, when you're fighting Raditz with Goku or Piccolo, he'll do his double Sunday attack, and the game moves more or less into a bit of a minigame where you need to move up and down to avoid the beams, or when facing off against Raccoon on Namek, you get this over-the-top camera style where you need to avoid falling damage. They're all cool little micro games that break up the, yes, entertaining but repetitive combat of Kakarot. Sure, you'll simply find yourself mashing the dodge button to get out of the way, but it's still kinda refreshing. Now, in a cool little addition too, a bit like other RPGs, say like Mass Effect, you can instruct your allies if they're in a fight with you, telling them to use certain abilities and such. For example, when facing off against Nappa, I got Krillin to use the Solar Flare, which would blind and stun your enemy for a short period of time, while I got Tien to use one of the coolest abilities of all in Dragon Ball, the Tri-Beam. Now, you can't spam these attacks though, as once your ally uses their special ability, their face icon, if you will turn grey and then slowly recharge over time until you can use that ability again. Now, allies also have a little circular energy gauge around them, and once these are full, you and your allies can do a bit of a team attack, bouncing off each other, performing a finisher style of move. Now, I've got to say, these styles of attacks always look wicked, and depending on how many allies you have in the field with you, which, you know, you can only maximally have 2 of them, but depending on how many you have, it determines on how much damage you do. And each ally as well has their own different battle roles. For example, Piccolo is a defensive character, so if you're about to get hit, Piccolo will take the brunt of the hits, where Vegeta is an aggressive attacker always on the charge, while Krillin is a healing character. Outside of combat, Kakarot is an open world game, but more so in the account of, say, Destiny or Marvel's Avengers, and wait just a second.
Let me tell you something! Let me tell you something! Wait!
It kind of works, but it is an annoyance at the same time. Now, when roaming around on the Earth, you'll have the free reign to explore biomes in the game, some of which share the same area. For example, you can go to Goku's house or Grandpa Gohan's house, as well as Yamcha's hideout from Dragon Ball, and it's in the same mini open world. Where, say, Master Roshi's house or Korin's tower, they're in 2 completely separate different areas. Now, to move between these areas, you can fly straight up into the sky, which will just open up the world map, or you can simply open up the world map from just opening up the map. Now, yeah, it is an open game, and the biomes are quite decent in size, but it can get annoying when you get missions that say, go to Master Roshi, then go see Chi-Chi, and then go see Mr. Popo. Now, there are loading screens too, unfortunately, when you're moving between these areas, and thankfully it is a pretty quick load, at least for PC for me. Now, the world is full of activities to do, like small side missions, like finding where Turtle hid Master Roshi's porno magazines, gathering parts for Bulma. You can also do some fishing, you can hunt animals, or well, find the 7 Dragon Balls and make a wish. The world is also full of these little different coloured orbs, a bit like, say, how Crackdown had those orbs all over the city, and collecting these orbs are used for currency in your talent tree, which I'll get to in a minute. Now, what kinda blew my mind is, yeah, the world of Kakarot is huge, it looks great. There's dinosaurs roaming around, there's animals to hunt, there's fishes to catch. It feels like the creative world that Dragon Ball is set in, but Dragon Ball Z sort of kinda left that world behind and focused more on the characters. But that sort of sense of awe is here. When you're finding the Dragon Balls and you want to make some wishes, you'll need to go into some different locations here and there, and going underwater, there's actually environments underwater, and it's wicked. The only thing it needed was some underwater wildlife. Now, what Kakarot does really well is retell the story of Dragon Ball Z without skipping through everything. In previous games, the first person you fight is generally Raditz, and yeah, Raditz is the first threat in the story of Dragon Ball Z. But if you've not watched the show in a while and you've just revisited the story through the games, but Raditz was stronger than Goku and Piccolo, who were enemies at the time, and it forces them to work together. Where here in Kakarot, you face off against Raditz 3 times, and straight after you defeat Raditz, Nappa and Vegeta don't just arrive. You play as Gohan to search for food, and you hunt dinosaurs, and you grow as a character. Now sure, it does skip over some small, sort of pointless moments like the fake Namek that Krillin, Bulma, and Gohan arrive on before getting to the real Namek, or the complete sub-story with Garlic Jr. because, you know, who else wanted to play the Garlic Jr. storylines?
Nobody likes you.
But in some instances, the game is a bit stretched out, and it has some cutscenes or moments that feel like it was pulled straight out of a Metal Gear game, and that it is cutscene after cutscene after cutscene. But Kakarot seems to give us some memorable moments of the series, like, yeah, we'll be playing as Piccolo as we look after Gohan before Vegeta and Nappa arrive, and the best filler episode of Dragon Ball Z is available as a side mission, well, it's actually sort of a main mission, you kinda have to do it, where Goku and Piccolo go for their driver's licenses. But speaking of cutscenes, the pre-rendered cutscenes are a thing of beauty. And while Kakarot is still a good looking game, these cutscenes are fantastic, and it gives me hope for what next gen Dragon Ball games we might get in the future. Like, look at how good the lighting, winds, and effects are right here. But gameplay graphics, Dragon Ball has some great little attention to details which also work great when paired with its iconic sound design. Calling in the Flying Nimbus as Goku was always a fun little Easter egg for me. Hearing that iconic whoosh as it arrives with that bubbling mechanical sound is awesome. Hell, at the start of the game, Goku can't fly, so if you want to get around the world of Kakarot, you need to call and use the Flying Nimbus, which was a little reference. But when you learn how to fly as Goku or you fly as other characters, when going near water, you'll have the water start to splash up. Goku's hair and clothes move around him when he's flying, the colour palette on the screen is bright and bubbly, and energy attacks look fantastic. Now, one of the main complaints people had with combat in previous open world Dragon Ball games is invisible walls, at least when it comes to, say, something like Xenoverse, where thankfully here there are no invisible walls. So if you smash your enemies so hard that they fly through multiple rock pillars, well then you're chasing them or they're flying back to you. And it's kinda cool to deal some damage and physically cause them flying into the world. But I didn't find myself sitting on the edge of my seat fully engaged in the melee combat like I did with Xenoverse 2. Now, there are also some small problems when it comes to combat. Now, enemies have this stun bar under their health, and when that goes down to 0, you've basically broken them, stunning them for a few moments. And any special attacks you do during this time gives you this rad mini cutscene when you do a special attack.
Got a gun!
And it's easy to send them flying, it's kinda cool. But breaking down this gauge of enemies can be a bit annoying, and the game doesn't tell you or teach you how to do this. You need to go into the menus and figure it out for yourself. Secondly, enemies have these special attacks where they highlight red and they don't flinch to any attacks, and if you leave yourself open for their attacks, they can really mess you up. Now, some enemies have a daisy chain of these attacks too, so if you get hit, you can find yourself on the wrong side of a shit sandwich. It does feel a little bit cheap too to be in the middle of this wicked combo about to knock them to the other side of the world, than to have the combo stopped because they're doing this red charge attack. It got to the point when I was facing off against Dr. Gero as Piccolo, and he was being able to move through my special beam cannon attacks, an attack which in other games is an unblockable attack, or through a barrage of energy attacks to grab me, drain my health and energy bar to replenish his own. This fight went on for about 15 minutes because he kept draining my health and energy when I was just about to finish him off, and it was just this daisy chain of red attacks and combos that would ignore whatever damage I was making.
This is bullshit!
There are also some things that had me scratching my head and had me go, wait, what? One of those is the beam lock. Now, I remember when I first saw this Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3 when I was a kid, when I was growing up, it was one of the coolest things I ever saw, and it reminded me of the Kamehameha vs Gallic Gun scene at the end of Season 1 of Dragon Ball Z. You can do this in Kakarot. The game doesn't teach you how to do this, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Basically, when an enemy is about to do a beam attack, you do your own beam attack at the same time. The only problem is, you need to pay attention to the area just under the enemy's health, which tells you what attack they're about to use on you. Then, you need to fire your beam attack at the same time. If you do this too early, you'll interrupt the enemy's attack, cancelling out their beam attack. If you do this too late, they'll do the same to you. But some enemies fire their super or iconic beam attacks super quick, where to the point where your attacks need to charge up, and it gets kind of annoying. With that, I think some beams or enemy attacks should or could have been scripted in combat against enemies, at least for story missions, because Goku and the gang don't take physical damage or cosmetic damage during battles, yet once the fight is done, you'll see Goku with a ripped shirt or Vegeta with a broken shoulder guard. Where it could have been cool to say, have a quick little, timed event, a button mash, or a little scripted event here or there where we see Goku get grabbed or beaten up, causing his clothes to rip and tear during the fight, which would then make sense of why his shirt's missing. As the game has us replaying and retelling the story of Dragon Ball Z, we're not playing as a custom character. Characters can have their, outfits and changed completely scripted in the story mode and molded to what mission we're doing or fight is taking place, rather than just a cutscene changing our outfits between fights. Now, there is a mechanic in the game that I'll just flat up say wasn't my jam, but I kinda get why it's in it in some way, and it's the community board aspect of the game. Now, each friendship or connection Goku makes, he'll have a soul emblem, if you will, that he'll place down on a community board. Now, there are multiple boards, such as the Z Fighter board, the cooking board, the adventure board, the training board, or the adult board, and each of these boards give you buffs like more damage or more zenny that you can earn, which is the money in the game. Each character or soul has a particular preference as to what board they prefer to be put on, or what board or what preference can be leveled up. For example, the adult board is basically a pile of porno, and Master Roshi is the staple head of that board. To get further buffs, you put the relevant characters on that specialty board. For example, Launch is really good at cooking, so you put her on the cooking board with Chi-Chi. But the kicker is too, some characters or souls get buffs when they're linked to other souls. So if you put Trunks and Yajirobe together, they are linked together because they're good at swords, that's the buff that they have. But from that, Yajirobe is the staple head for the adventure board, where Trunks' speciality is constructions and gadgets, and he'll be more suited to being on that board with Bulma. This system works as a physical representation that, well, Goku becomes friends with really everyone, but it's a bit of a spinning plate on what character goes on what board, and with what other souls do you put them with to give you the best perks or best buffs. Honestly, it was a mechanic that didn't really work for me, and this isn't the only RPG minigame style of system, but the other one works really damn well. Now, there's a food system in Kakarot where if you eat food, you'll get perks or buffs for certain periods of time, and you'll get ingredients for food by punching deer, causing them to explode, or by fishing with a fishing rod if you're playing as Vegeta, or a fake Saiyan tail if you're playing as Goku, which, yeah, is a bit weird. But you get meat, which you can then find with other ingredients at a campfire and then put it all together. Now, alternatively, you can get recipes and give them to Chi-Chi, who will then make a full course meal for you, which will give you more buffs and perks. Now, at first I thought this was a bit of a gimmick, but then I found in some fights it was getting a bit difficult or too close to losing, but if I was eating food before going into sort of an iconic battle, I was getting a pretty decent buff. You also generally need to eat at campfires or rest to restore your health, as if you daisy chain from mission to mission, Goku's health doesn't restore. Now finally, there is a skill tree that not only upgrades Goku's abilities, but what other playable characters like say Trunks or Piccolo, Gohan, and you can upgrade their abilities too. All of the orbs that you find out in the world are used as currency to learn and upgrade new abilities. But some other abilities like the Super Kamehameha needs to be done through the training grounds, which are little meditation points where you face off against enemies, and if you complete the training, you unlock the new ability. And if you can't be bothered going around the world collecting orbs, you can summon Shenron and use the Dragon Balls to, say, wish for orbs. And it takes maybe about 10 minutes or so to actually collect all the Dragon Balls, and then you have to wait an in-world 20 minutes before you can collect them again. Again though, there are more random components added into the game, like vehicles. At the start of the game, Goku can't fly and you'll be using the Nimbus to traverse around.
I'm aware!
But once Goku heads off to face off against Nappa and Vegeta, he knows how to fly, and flying is much faster than using the Nimbus. But flying uses energy. Now, there is a fun mission during that 3-year period where the androids are, gonna arrive, and Goku and Piccolo go and do their driver's lessons, and you can get in cars and vehicles here and there. Now, to sort of have a permanent car, Bulma needs to make you a car, which can then be upgraded and such, but it's a bit like Dragon Ball The Breakers that came out last year. Like, who asked for this mechanic? Who plays a Dragon Ball game as Goku so we can drive cars? Now, once you unlock the ability to fly as Goku, there's no real need to use the flying Nimbus unless you want to for nostalgia, because flying is faster than the Nimbus. Now, it seems like I'm talking a bit more about more negatives than positives with Kakarot, but another thing that sort of scratched my head was, well, the start of the game. Goku can't fly, so he uses the Nimbus to get around, which is true from the show.
I am aware!
But when in combat, Goku can fly, even when facing off against Raditz. It could have been cool if the game had a different style of combat when on the ground compared to, say, in the air, where ground combat could have been introduced to knock your enemies off their feet, or being able to plant your own feet into the ground when doing energy attacks, or something based around having more of a solid footing. where aerial combat might be, say, quicker or give you better chances of moving and more agility of getting out of a way of attacks. The only thing that I think is more of a missed opportunity is the characters you play as. The game is called Kakarot, but we play as Piccolo, Vegeta, Gohan, and Trunks throughout the game. And when Goku dies, then we play as Gohan and Piccolo as we train and prepare for Vegeta and Nappa, then we return to Goku when he returns back to Earth. Where I think you should have played as Goku, and solely Goku, for the entire game. And the start of the game's intro prologue, or learning how to play the game for the first hour or so, is the events of Dragon Ball. We start with meeting Bulma, how to find the Dragon Balls, facing off against Tien and Piccolo, basically giving us a bit of a backbone introduction before we start Dragon Ball Z. And as you progress in the game past the Namek Point, you can visit King Kai's planet if you want to when you're free roaming in Kakarot, and it's probably my favourite little biome because it's exactly what you think it is. And it could have been a great, way to just have the game focus solely on Kakarot and have us actually navigate Snake Way. That if we accidentally fall off the side and land in hell, we could revisit it later to, say, face off against defeated enemies. And there should have been a mission to chase Bubbles and Gregory and, go on King Kai's planet as a training mission. Then from there, if you want to, and if the game is popular enough, you can make spin-off games or DLC, whatever you want to call it, where it's the same game, but we solely follow Gohan, or we solely follow Piccolo or Vegeta, and experience their side of the story. Rather than giving us all of the character story at once, just make them singular characters. But the game is visually stunning. I had no game-breaking bugs, I experienced no crashes. The only thing the game was missing, and I only noticed it because I was playing on PC rather than on my Xbox in my living room, is there's no ultra-wide support, and that's the only PC issue I can think of. Now, just like Xenoverse 2, the game is still getting DLC to this day. We've got the Battle of the Gods and the Resurrection of F DLC, on top of the two most popular Dragon Ball movies with Bardock the Father of Goku and the History of Trunks. Also, Kakarot is basically a perfect foundation for a Superman game, seeing as Goku and Superman are so similar, and if the devs behind Kakarot made a Superman game, you'd have a pretty good game. But back to Kakarot though, it's an open world Dragon Ball game where you relive 80% of the story without flying through some battles or tossing them aside, and any that were thrown aside, like say Garlic Jr., they weren't major. It's got the option for both English and Japanese voice acting. The only thing it needed, in my personal opinion, was maybe the American music and themes, seeing as that's how I watched it when I was a kid.
Not him too!
The developers really did their homework and show their love for the source material here in Kakarot, having the stupid mission of Goku and Piccolo going getting their driver's license. While the episode is complete filler, it is one of my personal favourites. But is Kakarot better than Xenoverse 2?
I don't know.
One game lets us create our own character and re-experience the Dragon Ball timeline with some changes and challenges here and there, while Kakarot is an in-depth RPG retelling of the story of Dragon Ball. It all really depends on what you feel like playing. If you want to make your own Saiyan on a Mechian and train under Tien or Piccolo, then there's your answer. Now, if you want an open world free roam Dragon Ball Z game, then Kakarot is the only way to go. Now, you might be sitting there going, Dudi, you brought up a lot of negatives in this video. How can you say Kakarot's a good game? Well, the combat, the free roam, the story, it's all pretty damn good stuff. And there are a lot of negatives that I brought up, but sure, they're just personal issues that you may not have a problem with. There weren't any game-breaking bugs or anything like that, and I'll return to Kakarot anytime I want to play a Dragon Ball Z game as the Z Fighters, just as I'd return to Xenoverse 2 anytime I want to create my own Dragon Ball Z character. But whether you've been a fan of Dragon Ball Z since you were a kid watching it before you went to school in the mornings, or you've just started watching it after your friends have been pestering you to watch it, I'm looking at you, Deanna and Tom, always remember to play with each other and play with yourself.